T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Press the shit fire.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Press the shit fire.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Press the shit fire.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. Game week is finally upon us. Week 0 of the college football season is set to kick off this Saturday. We got FSU taking on Georgia Tech in Dublin, Ireland. And we're going to be breaking down this game in depth all week long. And not only are we going to dive into that game, but I also have to give you guys my SEC over-under win total projections. Will Alabama win over 9.5 games? Will Texas win over 10.5 or under 10.5 games this year? The Raiders finally have named their starting quarterback, and it's Gardner Minshew. Was this the right decision? And how far can you take Las Vegas this year? For the Pittsburgh Steelers, man, if you watch their Week 2 preseason game against the Buffalo Bills, things look really rough for the Steelers. The offensive line was terrible. Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, I think it's pretty clear who's the better quarterback. But no matter who you start, you're still screwed regardless if you're Mike Tomlin. And I just believe this is going to be his first losing season as the head coach of the Steelers. Michael Penix has been shut down by the Falcons for the rest of the preseason. I got to sound off on why it's really stupid that he's not seeing any more preseason action. Who's the best team in college football going into this year? Is it Georgia or Ohio State? The answer may surprise you. The AP, the Associated Press, released their preseason college football first and second team selections, and Shedeur Sanders didn't make either team. And I can't believe who they had the audacity to put over him. Now, USC and LSU are going to play week 1 on Sunday night in a few weeks. Is going to be one of the biggest games, not just of that week, but of the whole entire college football season. And there's something about this game that is starting to really annoy me. Georgia Tech, could they pull off the upset against FSU? And a lot of Florida fans have been flooding my DMs with this question. What happens if the Gators take down Miami week 1? Before we dive into it, shout out to everybody that's tuned in on YouTube, X. Greatly appreciate it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. Remember that we aren't just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. And before we dive into it, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Aura. In football, we all know that no quarterback can win without good protection up front. It's also important that you protect yourself from data brokers who sell your personal information online to scammers, spammers, and anybody else who may want to target you. That's why you should use Aura, today's sponsor of this episode. Aura shows which data brokers are passing away your information on the internet and automatically submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Go to aura.com/JTsports in description or pin comment down below to get a 14-day free trial and protect your personal information from being exposed online. Cleaning up your information online not only helps reduce the amount of spam you receive, but it also protects you from hackers who could use this info to help gain access into your social media accounts, Beck accounts, or other sensitive information. Go to our sponsor, aura.com/JTsports in description or pin comment down below to gain access to your 14-day free trial and protect yourself from hackers looking to gain access into your sensitive information online. All right, everyone. Before we start, shout out to my guy Kate Roan with the $5 donation. Greatly appreciate it. He says, powerful JT Sports Live, and football is back. This is the most wonderful time of the year. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you too with the donation. And I'm so glad that football season is officially here. And with that, You know, the Las Vegas Raiders have finally named their starting quarterback for this season. They're going with Gardner Minshew over Aidan O Connell. And I'm not going to lie to you. This took me by surprise because with Antonio Pierce being the defensive-minded coach, you thought he would have went with the quarterback that took less risk and was better taking care of the football in Aidan O Connell. With Gardner Minshew, he is somebody that has a reckless playing style where he'll push the football downfield a lot. He'll take a lot of chances. He'll make a lot of throws that would get a wide receiver fucked up. And with the kind of style of ball the Raiders plan on being able to overachieve with, relying on great defense and a dominant rushing attack, it's very important that you have a quarterback that takes care of the football. And I don't know if you're going to get that out of Gardner Minshew as compared to if you would have went with Aidan O Connell. Now, I do expect to see AOC start eventually because I don't think Gardner Minshew is going to be consistent enough for Las Vegas that he's going to remain the starter for the entire season. He was only good last year in Indianapolis because of Shane Steichen. And he's on his fourth team in 5 years. He pretty much is the new generation's Ryan Fitzpatrick, where he's a serviceable enough starter to get you by for a couple of games, maybe a season or two, but he's not going to lead you to the playoffs. Aidan O Connell, I think, has a little bit more upside, and as long as he takes a few more deep shots, he gives the Raiders a better chance to win. The only thing that Gardner Minshew has over Aidan O Connell is that he's more aggressive, and I guess Antonio Pierce wants to generate more big plays offensively this year. But with Minshew, he's going to cost you a good amount of games because you can't trust him in the fourth quarter. His ball security gets really questionable. Your offensive line, it looks improved on paper, but I don't believe it's going to be as good as what we think once the games start getting played. No matter what, if you went with AOC or Minshew, you would have been screwed regardless if you're Antonio Pierce because you got effed over by the Atlanta Falcons drafting Michael Penix. And let's just be honest about it. The Falcons screwed the Raiders because if they never took Michael Penix and he falls to whatever the pick the Raiders had to select him, this without a doubt would have been a playoff team. And it's hard to sell me on the idea of Las Vegas finishing second in the AFC West with 8-9 wins when you have the worst quarterback situation in the league right now. AOC and Gardner Minshew are backup quarterbacks at best. Now, if you had an offensive-minded coach like a Kyle Shanahan or Kevin Stefanski, then potentially you could overachieve with one of these dudes starting for you because offensive-minded coaches should be able to elevate whoever they have at quarterback. But with Antonio Pierce being the defensive-minded coach and hiring Luke Getsy to be his offensive coordinator, he set himself up for failure this year because you don't have an OC who's good enough to make Aidan O Connell and Gardner Minshew play at a level that could help you reach the postseason. And that should be the goal for Las Vegas when you remember that last year they won 8 games and they played way better under Antonio Pierce than what they did under Josh McDaniels. But you're going to have a hard time repeating that success you had last year when you're going up against a tougher schedule and you got to go up against way better quarterbacks than what you played last year. The only win the Raiders had under Antonio Pierce against a starting quarterback were the Kansas City Chiefs when they got lucky Christmas Day against Patrick Mahomes and company. Do you know how fortunate you have to be to win a game not completing a single pass after the first quarter? And every time they played a team with a winning record, they always lost. And the games mostly were unwatchable from an offensive standpoint. Gardner Minshew, I get that you have more big playability with him in, but you have more turnovers that are likely to occur with him starting for you as opposed to Aidan O'Connell. But when Aidan O'Connell comes in at some point this season, the knock on him is that he's too conservative, he doesn't take enough risk, and he's not one of those quarterbacks that's good at playing from behind. But this is one of those situations where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, because nobody really is all that good of an option. You know, their plan, I really believe, was to get Michael Penix. And when the Falcons took him at 8, that ruined all the hopes they had at potentially being a playoff team this year. It's a quarterback-driven league, and you're lying to yourself if you really believe Gardner Minshew and AOC can be good enough to get them into the postseason over the Chargers, the Denver Broncos, who have offensive-minded coaches, or really good coaches that know how to maximize the talent of their quarterback. And also, you're going to go up against two teams that are going to have better quarterback play than what they had last year. You know that win that you got against the Chargers last year on Thursday night when you got Brandon Staley fired? You won that game going up against Easton Stick. If Justin Herbert would have played and the Chargers were healthy, that would have been a completely different game that had a way different outcome. Just because you had a little bit of lightning in the bottle last year doesn't mean you're going to have that same thing occur this year with how tougher your schedule is. Yes, you are going to have a good defense. Your run game could be pretty good, but you don't have a quarterback that can win you games. You're just asking them, don't lose us any games, take care of the football. You're going up against Lamar, Joe Burrow, Mahomes, Herbert. You're fooling yourself if you think Minshew on his 4th team in 5 years, if this dude had any ability to be a solid starter, he wouldn't be thrown around, tossed around like a rag doll on his 4th team in 5 years. And he doesn't win games. He got beat out by Anthony Richardson last year when most of us thought that AR wasn't good enough to be a week 1 starter. What does that tell you? When you're on your 4th team in 5 years, fam, that means that you're not that good of a quarterback. You're a good backup option. You always see backup quarterbacks on the move. That's why he's this generation's Ryan Fitzpatrick. He may have a few games when he looks really good, but for the most part, you're going to get average to below average quarterback at best. And Davante Adams is probably going to end up demanding a trade with how many hospital balls Gardner Minshew is going to throw him this year. And yes, he is going to throw Davante Adams a couple of those balls when he ends up getting effed up, because he always does. That's part of the Gardner Minshew experience. The Raiders are screwed this year at quarterback. And it's why they're going to finish in last place in the AFC West this year. Another team that has quarterback issues, man. I'm sorry to all my fellow Pittsburgh Steelers fans out there, but this is going to be a really tough season. I cannot see the Steelers having more than 8 wins this year. And I understand that Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season in all his years being a head coach in Pittsburgh, but you know, one of the biggest life lessons that I learned in college the last couple of months is that everybody you meet has an expiration date. Everything that's good right now isn't going to stay good forever. And eventually, we're going to see the day where Mike Tomlin finally has a losing season. And I strongly believe that 2024 is going to be the year that it happens. It's a quarterback-driven league. You gotta have good quarterback play if you want to be able to compete for not just a playoff spot, but a chance at making it to the Super Bowl. And most of the NFL's best quarterbacks reside in the AFC. And for Mike Tomlin to continue to win games and overachieve with bad quarterback play is something that is unsustainable. Justin Fields looks like the better quarterback than what Russell Wilson does right now. But even if you decide to start him over Russ or you start Russ instead, you're still going to be screwed regardless because neither one of these guys is good enough to give you good enough quarterback play that's going to be consistent enough for you to have a winning season when you think about how tough Pittsburgh's schedule is going to be this year. You only swept Baltimore last year because you beat them with Lamar. I'll give you that. But the second time you played the Ravens, it doesn't count because you barely beat their JV team. You don't get no credit for sweeping the Ravens when you beat their junior varsity squad the last week of the season. The Cincinnati Bengals, when you beat them twice last year, you didn't play Joe Burrow. You played Jake Browning. We, as Steeler fans, Steeler Nation, need to have realistic expectations for this team. If you really believe Mike Tomlin can overachieve again, you're drinking and dabbling in the Mike Tomlin Kool-Aid. This dude is Stevie Wonder when it comes to evaluating the quarterback position. This is the same dude who it didn't take him until the final 4 weeks of last year pretty much to realize that, hey, my third string quarterback is the best QB on the roster. He should be starting. This is the same dude that had the audacity to say that Mitchell Trubisky should be the starting quarterback because he had experience being a franchise quarterback before. When has Mitch ever looked like a franchise quarterback, Mike Tomlin? And that's not even the worst of it. He wasted, or this franchise wasted, a first-round pick on Kenny Pickett. Like, you really mean to tell me that Mike Tomlin is going to find a way to sneak his way to 9-10 wins this season? I don't see it. I don't. The offensive line was getting abused and tossed around like a bunch of rag dolls against the Buffalo Bills in week 2 of the preseason. Broderick Jones got sunned by Gregory Rousseau. There are going to be a lot of young players that are expected to start on this offensive line. And when you have a young and mostly inexperienced offensive line, it's hard to get consistent play from that unit, and it's going to hinder the quarterback play because Russ and Justin Fields are going to be running for their lives. Russell Wilson, I'm sorry to all you Russ fans out there. The dude is washed up. Why do y'all refuse to admit it? The dude looked old and slow against the Buffalo Bills in the preseason. It's not 2016 anymore, people. It's 2024. Please wake up and realize that Russell Wilson is not good anymore. You cannot be a great player for your whole entire NFL career. Eventually, Father Time starts to catch up with you. And what has made Russell Wilson one of the best quarterbacks of the past decade has been his ability to break out of sacks and be able to play at an elite level despite having bad offensive line play. Don't sell me that excuse for why he struggled in his preseason debut with Pittsburgh last week using the offensive line, because he always had bad offensive line play for the majority of his prime years in Seattle. That's what made him so good, because he could turn negative plays into positive plays. He was Houdini with the football. But when you get old, your athleticism starts to decline. And when you lose your athletic ability, you're not going to be able to break out of sacks by defensive linemen and make those guys look stupid. You're going to have to be able to win from within the pocket. And Russ can't do that because he struggles to see the middle of the field. And I love Justin Fields. He's a great athlete. That's the only reason why he should start over Russell Wilson. Because if your offensive line is going to be inconsistent, it makes more sense to start the quarterback that can break out of sacks and still be able to give you a fighting chance to put points on the board despite the offensive line play not being good. But the flaw with Justin Fields isn't his inconsistency as a passer. It's the fact that he's been the worst quarterback in the NFL in the last 15 minutes of the game since 2021. He leads the NFL in fourth quarter turnovers. He has the lowest fourth quarter completion percentage than any other quarterback in the league since the last 3 years. You just can't trust Justin Fields in the fourth quarter, especially when you're playing from behind or even if you have a lead, because he just might choke it away for you. The most games I see the Steelers winning this year is 8. And I love Mike Tomlin. I'm not about to come back on here and say that we need to fire Mike Tomlin regardless of what happens this year. But what we do need is to finally find the answer to the Steelers' long-time quarterback woes. You're not going to go far in the postseason or even in the regular season at that with below to one of the worst quarterback play in the NFL consistently every year. Ever since the second half of 2020, when the Washington Commanders exposed the Steelers' offense in Big Ben's old age, this offense has been a complete catastrophe for over 3-4 years. This offense is so bad at times that you could watch it come on the field, go to the kitchen, get you a soda pop, warm you up something in the microwave for 45 seconds, and you come back a minute later, and the defense is right back on the field because the offense is going 3 and out. As a Steeler fan, I'm tired of this. Are y'all not? Russ is washed. If this dude was still good, Denver wouldn't have took the NFL's largest dead cap hit in league history to get rid of him. What's so hard to understand about that? Please tell me. If Russ is good, why did Denver take that large of a dead cap hit to get rid of him? Why? This dude was so bad to them that they had to just say, you know what? We don't care about the cap penalty for releasing you. Get the hell out of my locker room. We don't want you no more. This dude is playing for the veteran minimum. Does that what sounds what a still good quarterback in this league should be making? I mean, come on. Being better than Kenny Tragic, Mitchell Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph is nothing to be praising. It's not. The logic that, well, Justin Fields and Russ are better than what we had. This is like going from 2006 Nissan Altima to going to a 2008 Kia Sonata. It's not a big difference. You're still terrible at quarterback, no matter what. This is like saying my poop is poop, but my boo-boo is still better than the poop. You get what I'm trying to say? The Steelers are in for a really rough season this year. And it's going to be really hard to watch because you're still going to see the same issue that has been persistent with this team over the last 3-4 years still be the biggest issue for why this team is getting held back. And that's because the offense is tragic. It really is. Now you don't even got 2 decent wide receivers. The only reliable wideout you have is George Pickens. That's it. Your offensive line is getting outclassed in the preseason. And it's like at quarterback, you got Dumb and Dumber back there. Nobody really is going to play good enough to lead you to the playoffs. And I want Justin Fields to work out in the NFL. I'm a huge Justin Fields fan. He's one of my favorite players in the league, but he is not it. This is going to be a rough season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the expiration date on Mike Tomlin's winning seasons is about to come to fruition in the next couple of months. Now, next up, I want to give you guys my SEC over-under win total projections for the 2024 college football season. But before we dive into that, shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to my guy, the Snake Sports Talk. He says, if this fails for the Raiders, I'll start scouting my next potential franchise QB in the draft. Do they tank and try to get Shedeur? Listen, I don't think Antonio Pierce is going to get fired this year. I believe that everybody in the Raiders organization knew what they were getting themselves into once Michael Penix got taken by Atlanta. And he does have a little bit of time. They're going to give him at least 3 years. They're tired of being a revolving door at head coach. And the locker room does like Antonio Pierce. I do think that everybody believes in him, and I do as well. But until you can find a guy at quarterback, which the Raiders don't have, you're going to be screwed. Shout out to my guy, Robert Turner. He says JT head coaches and staff see way more than any talking heads. Remember when Bledsoe went down? Many talking heads were not. I get that, Robert Turner. But you see, Bill Belichick knows talent. He's the greatest head coach in NFL history, in my opinion. Mike Tomlin has missed that quarterback ever since Big Ben has retired. So, I get that these are head coaches. You would think that they know more than us. But from the decisions that Mike Tomlin has been making with QB, I think it's fair to say that whatever he knows about the quarterback position, he doesn't really know all too much compared to us. And maybe some of us know more than him. Just saying, with him picking Mitchell Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, and Mason Rudolph. Listen, I love Mike Tomlin, but man, I just don't see it with the Steelers this year. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Remember to check us out on all podcasting platforms, JT Sports Podcast. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Now, I want to give you guys my SEC over-under win total projections for this upcoming season. We're going to start off with Arkansas. Vegas has them at 4.5 wins. I got to take the under. They bring back Bobby Petrino to be their offensive coordinator. And I guess they're trying to bring back some of the nostalgia that they have from the early 2010s when Petrino was there and they were winning double-digit games. They had a lot of success with Ryan Mallett at QB. But those days are over. I believe that the game has passed Bobby Petrino by. The offense at Texas A&M wasn't that good. And I don't really expect Arkansas's offense to be that better. You got Trenton Green, who is DJ Uiagalelei, but way more athletic. You got concerns on the offensive line. You don't really have a lot of talent at wide receiver. Defensively, you got some talent there, but I don't know about your defensive coordinator. I see Arkansas being probably the worst team in the SEC this year. I got them at 3 wins, so I'm going to go with the under with 4.5 wins. Vanderbilt. Vegas has them with the win total of 3 this year. Give me the over. They do have a few games where they're playing scrubs and they should be able to win those games. And Vanderbilt has shown in the past that when they go up against inferior competition, they're able to take care of business. The problem is the SEC just treats them like a doormat. And the talent gap between them and the rest of this conference is so huge that it's hard for any head coach to have success at this program, especially when they prioritize academics over athletics. And what shows me how unserious Vandy is about football is how they had their team last year playing in a stadium that was under construction. But, you know, for them to have a win total of 3 wins, it may seem like a lot, but with their schedule, they should at least be able to get the 4 wins. Mississippi State, their win total is 4 wins this year. I got to go with the push. I actually think that they will win 4 games this year. This is a team that has a new head coach, Jeff Lebby, who was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, and they've mainly are relying on a bunch of transfers to perform well for them. You got the former Baylor QB and Blake Shapen. And if he ends up being decent, this could be a fun team to watch with how solid this offense can be. They do have some capable wide receivers. Don't know about the offensive line. And the defense, at least with the defensive line, they don't look too bad there. But they got a lot of transfers in there. And they pretty much are going the Colorado route, which is why I can't see them winning more than 4 games. But they got games on their schedule that are definitely winnable. So this is a push. Florida, 4.5 wins. Over, under. I'll go over. Florida may not be bowl eligible this year, but they definitely won't be one of those teams that ends up being a bottom dweller in the SEC. They do have a really good team. And my problem with Florida isn't talent. As a matter of fact, from a talent standpoint, I would rank them in the top half of the SEC, at least top 7 talent-wise. But the coaching is what frustrates me with the Gators. I don't trust Billy Napier, nor do I trust defensive coordinator Austin Armstrong. But they can get the 5 wins. Maybe they beat Miami week 1. Maybe they pull off another upset late in the season against Florida State. But, you know, there aren't too many games that you can go through on Florida's schedule this year and say, yeah, they definitely are going to win those. A lot of them are either 50-50 or insanely one-sided. You got to go on the road to play Texas and Austin. You got no chance in hell at being able to win that game. Do you not know how hard it is to win on the road at Texas? Florida, I got them over 4.5 wins. I see this being a 5-win team, but man, at first I thought their win total was 3.5. It bumped up to 4, but they definitely can get the 5 wins. South Carolina, give me the over on 5.5 wins this year. As a matter of fact, this is a lock. This is one of these over-under bets that I love. South Carolina is going extremely under the radar. The main reason why 2023 was a nightmare for the Gamecocks was because by the time they got to week 2, week 3, nearly the majority of their starting offensive line was injured. And they had to start a lot of younger guys up front. The quarterback play was pretty good, but everything else around Spencer Rattler wasn't so great. But they've upgraded tremendously offensively. You bring in Rocket Sanders from the transfer portal. You got Nick Harbor, who is probably the freakish athlete in college football this year. You got Lenore Sellers stepping in at quarterback. He has a lot of upside, a lot of potential, and you return an experienced defense. And on paper, you're going to ask me, JT, where are the wins from South Carolina? And some of those wins are going to be upsets at home. But you can't tell me that South Carolina isn't capable of being able to beat some of the better teams that they have to play this year when Shane Beamer, remember the last couple of weeks of 2022 when they upset Tennessee, ruined their playoff hopes, and did the same to Clemson the week after? Shane Beamer is one of the best coaches at being able to win games where South Carolina is an underdog. So counting out Shane Beamer when he has shown the track record of being able to deliver upsets in the past, I'm not willing to do that. I believe that South Carolina is going to have a big bounce back season in a major way, and I have them winning 7 games this year. Auburn, I have them over 7.5 wins this year. Auburn's in a really tough spot because if they were in the ACC or the Big 12, I believe they would have been good enough to win those conferences potentially, or maybe finish in the top 3. They are a team that has a lot of young guys that they're relying on, but a good amount of experience on that squad this year. And Hugh Freeze showed a lot of promise in year 1, although things looked really ugly when they lost to that random team at home. I think it was New Mexico State. But one thing about Auburn is that they're one of those teams that anytime they play at home, you like their chances to pull off some upsets against big teams. It's just a weird aura around Jordan-Hare Stadium that for some reason they tend to be really lucky at times. And you can see a little bit of that luck happen this year. And even think about when they almost beat Georgia. If it wasn't for Brock Bowers, they would have lost that game. So Auburn, I definitely love them to win more than 7.5 games this year. I have them at 8 wins, as a matter of fact. Georgia, this win total is really large. 10.5 wins. You're telling me that Georgia is only going to have 1 loss this year, which any other year definitely seems realistic and it seems attainable. But they play 3 of their toughest games this season on the road against 3 of the SEC's top leading odds teams to win this conference, right behind them in Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas. If Georgia ends up losing only one of those games, they're going to win it all. But it doesn't matter if you believe Georgia is the most talented team in college football. Anytime you're going on the road against superior teams that aren't too far off from you talent-wise, especially Texas and Alabama, the gap isn't that big because they recruit on the same level as you. It's hard to see Georgia not losing at least 2 of those road games this year. I'm not saying it's going to be against Ole Miss or whatnot, but they're at least going to have 2 losses. So I got them under 10.5 wins. I don't see them being a 9-3 team. I don't think that's going to happen, but 10-2, I definitely see that being realistic for Georgia. Some people think that it's unrealistic, but I just can't see them going 11-1. Give me the under. Kentucky, over 6.5 wins. I love it. I love it. I love it. A lot of you folks are sleeping on the Wildcats this year. They got everything that you need to be a top team in the SEC this year. You're good up front on the offensive line and defensive line. You got a really athletic secondary. And offensively, at wide receiver, you got 2 of the better wideouts in the SEC that nobody knows about in Dane Key and Barry and Brown. And if Brock Vandagriff gives you good quarterback play this year, which I believe is going to happen, you could definitely find yourself being a lock to win at least 8 games this year and potentially more. Kentucky's one of those programs that every 3 years, they always have a season where they come out of nowhere and win 9-10 games. This could be that year. LSU, they have a win total of 9. I just don't see it with the Tigers this year. I got to go with the under. I don't like Brian Kelly anymore as a head coach for some reason. You know, I was a really big fan of his when he was at Notre Dame, and he took the LSU job, and he overachieved year 1. But after that, the progress has kind of been stagnant, and I know that progress isn't always linear, but the more I watch LSU, the more I don't believe in Brian Kelly being able to deliver a natty there. And I think that they're heavily overrated. I got them under 9 wins. I see them 8-7, around that range of wins. The defense is still a huge question mark. I know you got a new DC, a new defensive staff, but you're still lacking the talent and depth on the interior. And kind of in the secondary as well that you need to be able to sustain winning consistently in this conference. You're pretty much going to be what Ole Miss was last year. Every game's going to be a shootout. Your defense may slightly be better, but with some of the teams you're going to be facing, I just don't see you being a 9-win team. I think you're heavily overrated. Texas A&M, I got to go with under 8.5 wins. I don't have them winning less than 8. I actually have them at 8-4. The problem is that, you know, with 8.5, you throw that 0.5 in there, you got to win 9 games, which definitely is possible, but I do have concerns about the offensive line. There's some areas on defense that are not bad, but could be a little bit more better. And maybe this is an adjustment year for Mike Elko. I know the dude was winning at Duke, but it's not like he was doing what Kalen DeBoer was doing, leading Duke to the ACC championship and the college football playoffs, like what DeBoer did at Washington. But, you know, he did do more of less at Duke. But I could see this being a transitional year for Mike Elko down in College Station. And 2025 is the year I believe we really see A&M start to hit their stride year 2 under Mike Elko. But they're still going to be a decent team this year. They're one of the biggest wildcard teams in college football this year. If everything works out, they could win this conference. The talent is there, but, you know, there's a few positions where you got some concerns. Now, Missouri is projected to win 9.5 games this year. Listen, I'm without a doubt am taking the under. You see, the problem with Mizzou this year is that people are living off the recency bias with them. when every year there's a team that comes out of nowhere, they end up winning double-digit games, and they end up being college football Cinderella story. A few years back in 2019, Minnesota was that squad, and everybody thought that the Gophers under P.J. Fleck were going to be able to be the next big contenders in the Big Ten. And ever since that year, Minnesota has come nowhere close to eclipsing 9 wins. Missouri is going to come back down to earth this year. They lose a lot of their experience from last year on defense. They also lose their defensive coordinator to LSU. They do return nearly almost everybody on offense, but there were a few games that they won last year that if the ball would have bounced in a different direction, could have been losses, like when they nearly lost to Florida. And I don't see this being a consistent program yet under Eli Drinkwitz, when them being a 9 or 10 win team is always going to be sustainable on a consistent year in and year out basis. So I'm going with under 9.5 wins for Mizzou. Oklahoma, I love the over with 7.5 wins this year. This is one of the most disrespected teams in college football going into this year. Nobody is giving the Sooners a chance to win the SEC despite them having one of the best defenses coming into this year. You got a lot of talent in your skill position rooms. At wide receiver, you're loaded. Running back, Gavin Sawchuk, I love him a lot. And if Jackson Arnold plays up to his potential, this is a really dangerous team, and I could definitely see them playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in December for the SEC title. I know they got a few tough games, but some of those are at home. It's not easy to win in Norman, and we forget how good Brent Venables' defense was at times last year, especially at forcing turnovers. And with a lot of these guys being upperclassmen, along with guys that Brent Venables has recruited and developed, I love how good Oklahoma is all around. Over 7.5 wins. This is an absolute lock to me. It's going to happen. Ole Miss, I got to go under 9.5 wins. I got them at 9-3. I can't see this being a 10-win team again this year. They do have a really favorable schedule, and there's no team that has an easier path to the SEC championship than what Ole Miss does, but I can see them having a couple of losses to teams that they would be favored to beat right now. But overall, I still view this as a potential playoff team. I know that Lane Kiffin has been building that program up to a really good level where you believe that this is the year that Ole Miss can get over the hump, win this conference, get an automatic playoff bid. But I just don't see things playing out how most expect for the Rebels this year. I just think that, there's going to be a few bumps and bruises. Still a really great team, but not as good as what a lot of us think. Tennessee, I was surprised that their win total is only at 8.5 because I thought it was going to be 9.5 considering what they returned on offense. You got a deep and experienced group of wide receivers, which you got depleted with injuries at that position last year. Now you're fully healthy. You got a really good transfer from Tulane and Chris Brazil. You got Nico Imaviava stepping in at quarterback. He should be a huge upgrade from Joe Milton. He's Trevor Lawrence, but times 100 athletic ability. Defensively, you got a really good defensive line. As a matter of fact, one of the best in college football. Your secondary is your biggest question, but when you run the style of offense that you run with that high tempo, you're always going to put your defense at a disadvantage with the amount of plays that they're going to be on the field for. But I expect this offense to bounce back to the form that we saw them play at in 2022 under Hendon Hooker when he finished top 5 in Heisman voting. So over 8.5 wins for the Vols for me. Texas, 10.5 wins seems like a lot considering that this is their first year in the SEC. Are they ready for the elite level of play that they're going to be up against every week. Yes, they are, because they've recruited at the top 5 level, and they are really well coached. They got a really good team. Quinn Ewers comes back at offense. You got Isaiah Bond at wide receiver out of the transfer portal. You got what should be one of the best offensive lines in college football, but your run defense definitely could go down a little bit. And with your win total being this high, you're saying that you're going to only be 11-1. And it's hard if Georgia ends up being 10-2 to see you being better than that, because just how oversaturated this conference is with great teams. And I got Texas making it to the SEC championship, by the way. I got their regular season record being 10-2. I just can't see them getting over 11 wins with how steep the competition is this year. And lastly, Alabama, give me the over at 9.5 wins. This is a lock to me. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's been. If you can lead Washington to a national championship in only 2 years, you can do the same at Alabama, possibly more than that. You could win it all this year, because it's not like all the talent that Nick Saban recruited left Bama. They only lost a few key players like Caleb Downs, Caden Proctor, then he ended up coming back. You got Jalen Milroe, who's expected to be not only a Heisman finalist, but he's one of the most polarizing players in this sport this year. And Kalen DeBoer, his offense is a perfect fit for Jalen Milroe's skill set, because he's one of the best deep ball throwers in the nation. And Kalen DeBoer, what made his offense so fun to watch at Washington last year was how efficient Michael Penix was with Roma Dunze and those other wide receivers at completing throws outside of the numbers, 30, 40 yards plus downfield. So that's why I love Alabama to be over 9.5 wins. I got them being the only team in the SEC this year with 1 loss. I got them winning this conference. And a lot of people in the South don't know just how good of a coach Kalen DeBoer truly is. But after this season, the whole world is about to be woken up to just how much of a prodigy Kalen DeBoer is as a head coach. So these are my 2024 SEC over-under win total projections. Leave yours down in the comment section down below. Comment your thoughts. I'm eager to hear what you guys have to say. If you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Remember, we aren't just a YouTube channel. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify, Amazon. If you enjoy the pod and you want to support us, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast from, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. All you got to do is type in the JT Sports Podcast or go to the link in the descriptions, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the pod. Follow us on Instagram at JTSports_. Send your questions in the DMs and on X at JTSports__. All right, now. So I went to tune in to the Atlanta Falcons Week 2 preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens because I wanted to see more of Michael Penix because he played so well Week 1 against the Dolphins. I had to see if my eyes were deceiving me. And anytime a quarterback looks well in their first ever preseason game, you need to see it a second time to know that you weren't fooled. So I was really disappointed when I tuned in to find out that the Atlanta Falcons were so impressed with how well Michael Penix played in their Week 1 preseason opener against Miami that they're shutting him down for the rest of the preseason, which is really shocking because they don't plan on starting this dude for another 2 or 3 seasons. And if he's not going to be getting any in-game action in the regular season, you would think that the preseason would be the best opportunity to get Michael Penix some meaningful in-game reps. But instead, you're going to end up saying, no, we've seen enough out of you. we're just going to shut you down so we don't risk anything bad happening to you in terms of injuries. It seems like anytime the Falcons take one step forward, they take two steps backwards, because they made a good decision by trading for Matthew Judon and signing Justin Simmons in free agency. And I was like, cool, like, you guys are making some progress. And then they turn around and they do stupid shit like this, benching your first round pick who's not going to play for the next couple of years, not allowing him to get in-game experience in the preseason. This is a terrible way to develop a rookie quarterback. Snaps mean everything. No matter if it's practice, the preseason, or an exhibition, you can never get too much in-game experience. I don't understand what's the point of watching one preseason game out of the dude and then saying, oh yeah, like, we've seen enough out of Michael Penix. What did you see in that game against the Dolphins? Is he going to be the black version of Tom Brady? Is he the next Lamar? The next Patrick Mahomes? Because we've only seen so small of a sample size that it's easy to be fooled with how well he played. We need more game tape of Michael Penix to be able to properly assess just where he's at this stage of his career. For all we know, he may be a bigger work in progress than what most of us thought when he was coming out of Washington. Is he injured? Is he like having a hard time recovering from some of the big hits that he took week 1 against the Dolphins? Because he was getting absolutely floored. I mean, there was one throw that he threw to a wide receiver downfield that would have been a touchdown if the dude kept running, and he got absolutely blitzed, and I thought that his ribs almost got broke after that hit. But, the Atlanta Falcons are just a weird organization. I mean, some of the decisions that they make don't seem logical. And if you're a Falcons fan, you got to comment, what is the logic behind not playing Penix anymore? Because we need to see what this dude has. If he's not going to play for 2 to 3 years, the only way he's going to get better is by getting meaningful in-game action in the preseason. It doesn't matter if you're going against backups and practice squad, UFL guys. In-game action is meaningful no matter who it's against, despite the level of competition. He needs this for his development. You're putting him at a disadvantage by not letting him get out there, and then come the regular season 3 years from now, you actually plan on starting this dude and he's a little bit rusty. And you're going to think back to this decision to sit him for the majority of this preseason when all of the other rookie quarterbacks are out there. And if J.J. McCarthy never had that season-ending meniscus surgery, despite him not expecting to start this year, he still would have been out there. Same thing with Drake May. I really scratch my head every time the Atlanta Falcons make certain decisions, because they do a good job with certain things. When they signed Kirk Cousins, I thought it was a great move. But then you negate how good of a move it was when you draft Michael Penix at 8. And then you trade for Matt Judon, you sign Justin Simmons, but then you sit Michael Penix for the rest of the preseason. I don't know. Maybe this dude looked like the second coming of Michael Vick, but a better passer in his first preseason game. I really don't know, but it's just really odd that you're going to be sitting somebody for the next couple of years and you're not going to allow them to get in-game action when they have the opportunity to. Now, the AP released their, what's it called? Okay. The AP released their All-American teams. How you say it? Okay. So the AP released their preseason 2024 All-American teams, and their first team quarterback was Carson Beck. Understandable. But their second team selection really shocked me. They have Dillon Gabriel as their second team quarterback over Shedeur Sanders. And there's no way you can justify this. Shedeur Sanders is miles better than Dillon Gabriel. Just because Dillon Gabriel plays on a better team than what Shedeur Sanders does, doesn't mean he's the better quarterback. If Oregon has Shedeur instead of Dillon Gabriel, they will be a better team than what they already are. Shedeur Sanders had 27 touchdowns to 3 interceptions last year. That was one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in America last year, despite playing behind the worst offensive line in college football and having a team that was in a complete rebuild. And if you take Shedeur off of last year's Colorado team, they probably would have won no games. But if you were to swap Shedeur with Dillon Gabriel wouldn't have been able to put up the kind of numbers that Shedeur did at Colorado last year if he was in that quarterback for the Buffs and not Sanders. And the argument against Shedeur is really stupid. He's not a good QB because he was part of a team that only won 4 games. When did football become an individual sport? Because the last time I checked, there's 10 other guys on the field at the same time with the quarterback that all have important roles in the team's success. Your win-loss record isn't an indicator of how good of a quarterback you are. Caleb Williams he only won 7 games last year at USC. And he went first overall in this past year's NFL draft. He's already looking like the second coming of Patrick Mahomes. It's a stupid argument to say Dillon Gabriel is better than Shedeur because he's on a better team and Shedeur was on a team that only won 4 games. Shedeur, without a doubt, is the second best, arguably the best quarterback in college football going into this year. There's not a single quarterback that would have been able to have the season that he did behind that terrible of an offensive line. If you would have put him on Alabama, Clemson, even Ohio State last year, those teams possibly win it all. It's really, we're starting to get really ignorant to how good Shedeur Sanders actually is. You cannot justify leaving him off a list like this for a guy who got forced to transfer because he got his job taken by a freshman. And I don't care how you try to spin it if you're an Oregon fan. You heard what Brent Venables said. He was more than welcome to stay and compete for his starting job. I mean, I'm just saying, it doesn't matter if he's a projected Heisman finalist or not. He's not better than Shedeur. Shedeur Sanders is a projected top 10 pick in next year's draft. Dillon Gabriel is probably going to be a 6th or 7th round pick next year's draft. Dillon Gabriel is not a more talented quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. Having him as the second team quarterback, if you're the AP, is extremely tone deaf. Are you even watching these damn games? Like, are you? Dillon Gabriel is a really good college quarterback. Not trying to take that away from him. He's top 5. But he's not better than Shedeur Sanders. Some of you guys have a casual thinking with how you evaluate how good players are. You can evaluate how good a QB is solely based off how many wins his team had, because it's a team sport. You can have the best quarterback in college football and maybe only win 3-4 games if the rest of your team is dog shit. The logic that some of you are using to justify this snub is really befuddling to me because it makes no sense at all. Shedeur Sanders is the second, arguably the best quarterback in the sport. His mechanics, his accuracy, his decision-making is top-notch. Is he a perfect QB? No. But neither is Carson Beck or anybody else. But it's ridiculous the amount of disrespect that the media continues to throw at Shedeur Sanders' way. And him not being as good as a leader as what some of y'all think isn't a reason to put Dillon Gabriel over him. I don't care if you're a likable guy or not. I only care about what you do on the field. Leadership has nothing to do with who is the better quarterback. Shedeur Sanders, any Saturday, any day of the week, if I was building a football team, could be my quarterback anytime. This dude really has that it factor. He has that dog in him, and it really is starting to annoy me with how much the national media is underrating him. He's the second best quarterback, top 3 quarterback in the sport. No worse than that. You can't name me 10 quarterbacks better than Shedeur. And Dillon Gabriel definitely isn't one of them. Some of y'all are just some freaking haters when it comes to anything pertaining to Colorado, Shedeur Sanders, or Shedeur. We got to knock this disrespect off. We do. Dillon Gabriel being the second team AP preseason quarterback selection was really disrespectful. I mean, insanely. There's no way you can justify Dillon Gabriel being a better quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. You just can't. You put him in Shedeur's situation last year, I guarantee you he doesn't put up the kind of numbers that he has at Oklahoma or UCF and what he's about to do at Oregon. Insanity, man. Insanity. They really put Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. I cannot believe this. I really can't. USC and LSU is one of the biggest week 1 games. That came out wrong. USC versus LSU is one of college football's biggest week 1 games this year. And I'm getting really annoyed hearing people talk about this matchup because everybody keeps talking about LSU's new coaching staff, them hiring new DC from Missouri, Blake Baker, overhauling the rest of their defensive staff. But anytime people talk about USC, I don't know how good their defense is going to be. If anything, their defense is still going to be bad because Lincoln Riley doesn't know defense. They don't have size and physicality up front. And they just completely leave out the fact that USC did the exact same thing LSU just did. They hired a new defensive coordinator in Deanna Lynn. They overhauled their defensive staff, but nobody talks about it though. People just make it seem like USC has made no changes at all. USC is going to surprise a lot of people in this game because LSU shockingly is a 7.5 point favorite in this game. But Lincoln Riley knows how to win big time matchups. He's no stranger to big games. I literally seen somebody reply to me on X and say that he can't trust Lincoln Riley in big games. Like, the hell are you talking about? Do you not know how many big games Lincoln has won over his coaching career? I'm not going to say we because I'm not doing it, but something that a lot of you fans are doing is ignoring Lincoln Riley's overall resume. And the public opinion on Lincoln Riley right now is solely based off him having the worst season of his coaching career. He's never won anything less than double digits up until 2023. And now all of a sudden, he's an overrated head coach. He'll never get the defense right, despite him having the same defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, for his entire coaching career until this year. And all of a sudden, we're questioning USC's offense under the same head coach who is responsible for grooming several Heisman winners at quarterback and getting those guys selected number 1 overall in the NFL draft. If you want to become a great quarterback, win the Heisman, become the first overall pick in the draft, you go to play for Lincoln Riley. To question Lincoln Riley's offense is insanity to me when LSU, the gap between them and USC is not that big. Yes, LSU has recruited better than USC, but they still have nearly all the same concerns that the Trojans do heading into this season. Other than the offensive line, which is way better than USC's, I don't think the gap is that big, honestly. I mean, they both have really good receivers. Yeah, LSU has Kyron Lacy, but some of y'all don't know about Zachariah Branch. He's one of the fastest, if not the fastest wide receiver in college football. He's like Tavon Austin meets DeAnthony Thomas at wide receiver. He's going to be a potential Heisman contender this year. They've recruited nothing but 5-star, 4-star guys and top 100 recruits at wide receiver. So they're more than deep at that position. Their offensive line is going to improve because Lincoln Riley has also gotten numerous offensive linemen like Creed Humphrey and Cody Ford drafted in the National Football League. Why are we basing our opinion on Lincoln Riley off one down season out of a bunch of great seasons? Why are we just giving LSU all the props for all the changes they've made this offseason and just completely ignoring how USC has gotten better on defense? Somebody told me earlier on X that USC is too small up front when what they have prioritized this offseason is gaining weight. Their defensive line has gained the combined total of over 340 pounds in weight gains. And for those of the players who can't reach USC's weight gain threshold, they got to do punishment. They have to push a sled after practice and do extra workouts as punishment for not gaining the necessary required weight. Lincoln Riley has done just about everything you can to become a more physical team and prepare for the upcoming season that USC has ahead of them. Now, I'm not saying that USC is going to win this game, but I expect them to cover that 7.5-point spread, and whoever wins this game is going to come down to the last possession, most likely, who gets the ball last, and it's going to be won by no more than 3-4 points. Because the gap between LSU and USC this year isn't as big as what a lot of you all are making it out to be. And that's what's really annoying, because with these SEC teams, they get a little bit of bias thrown their way because of the conference that they come from. And we just ignore how good the opponents they are facing are. Like, I'm pretty confident nobody thought that LSU was going to lose 2 straight to Florida State. But they did. People were wrong about that game. People thought that LSU could have beaten Florida State last year, and they still lost in embarrassing fashion. They got taken to the dog shed. And I personally think that Lincoln Riley is a better coach than Brian Kelly. At least Lincoln Riley can win big games. I've seen Brian Kelly consistently come up short in these big-time games, especially early in the season. LSU, they got the same issues that USC has. You don't have that much talent nor depth on your defensive line. Are you better on the D-line than USC? Yes, but not by that much. You know, this is going to be a way closer game than what people are expecting, and I'm getting really irritated with how everybody's giving LSU props for the changes they've been making, but just completely act like USC is the same damn team that we saw from last year. Like, cut me a damn break. Like, seriously. And some of y'all claim I don't do no damn research. That's what irritates me about doing this, right? Because anytime I have an opinion that nobody agrees with, it's, oh, you ain't do your damn research. When y'all aren't doing your research. Because if you did, you still wouldn't be thinking USC is the same team that they were last year. Some of y'all need to do some homework on USC and stop judging this team based off the national media perception. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Who is the best team in college football going into this season? Is it Georgia or Ohio State? I believe the answer is going to shock you, but I'm going to have to say it's Ohio State. Offensively, when you compare Ohio State's offense to Georgia's, Ohio State overall has the more talented offense. At quarterback, you got to give it to Georgia. Carson Beck is nowhere close to Will Howard, okay? Carson Beck is arguably the best quarterback in college football, depending on who you ask. Will Howard, he's above average. He's good enough to win you games if you got a good team around him. At running back, though, I don't even think it's even close. Ohio State has Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, two of the best running backs in the nation. Georgia's running back room is deep. They did get Trevor Etienne from the transfer portal, but Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, you got two top 5 backs on one team. I don't even know how that was allowed to happen. They got to outlaw Ohio State's ability to spend in the transfer portal, man, because it's just utterly ridiculous. And that wide receiver, tight end, I mean, some people are probably going to disagree and say that Georgia's wide receiver room is just as good as Ohio State, but the Buckeyes got Jeremiah Smith, who is probably the best high school recruit at receiver that we've seen since Julio Jones nearly a decade and some change ago. And they also do a really good job at developing that position. They pretty much are the new wide receiver U in college football. All Georgia really has is Dominic Lovett. They also got some highly recruited guys, but their wide receiver room from a talent and depth standpoint isn't as good as what Ohio State's is. On the O-line, we got to give it to Georgia. Everybody starting this year is probably going to be playing in the NFL. They're going to get drafted high. But overall, I give it to Ohio State. You not only have the better running back room, wide receiver room than Georgia, but you got a better offensive coordinator than what Georgia has. Ohio State hired Chip Kelly. I don't care how you guys feel about Chip Kelly's tenure at UCLA. That dude won there. And he's one of the pioneers of what college football is today with all these spread, no-huddle offenses. And if you give this dude a great team with all these talented pieces to use, he's going to cook. So Ohio State has the best offensive coordinator in college football, the best running back and wide receiver room in the nation offensively. I give the edge to the Buckeyes offense. Now let's move on to the defense. I still love Ohio State over Georgia. The only position that Georgia is better at than Ohio State, in my opinion, this year is linebacker, because you do have Small Munden. You also got Raylan Wilson, who was a freshman all-SEC selection last year. C.J. Allen is also a guy to look out for. And Ohio State has to replace Tommy Eichenberg and Still Chambers, who were two of the best linebackers in the Big Ten last year. But outside of that, their defensive line is deeper compared to Georgia's. You got Jack Sawyer, Tyleik Williams, JTT. Both of those dudes should easily end up being first-round, second-round picks in next year's draft. Georgia has Michael Williams and Nazir Stackhouse, but their D-line isn't as good as what it normally is. And with Ohio State, with the talent and depth that you have on the interior D-line, that's what gives you the advantage in that department as compared to the Bulldogs. And the secondary, Georgia always produces really good defensive backs. But Ohio State has more experience at that position this year. You got Denzel Berg. You got another good cornerback with the complicated last name to pronounce. You got Latham Ransom. You just got Caleb Downs from the portal. I'm taking Ohio State's defense over Georgia and Ohio State's offense. And to me, Ohio State is clearly the best team entering this season. I understand that last year they lost their bowl game to Missouri, but who cares? It's based off talent. And if Ohio State plays up to the level of talent that they have on this roster this year, they should easily be able to win the national championship this year, even if they got to play Georgia. This is the year that Ryan Day should be able to be holding up that championship gold this year. There is way too much talent across the board for Ohio State to continue to come up short this year. If I was to do a top 25, I would put the Buckeyes over Georgia this year. Yes, Georgia is good enough to win it all, but the gap between Ohio State and Georgia, there is no gap. They're pretty much on the same level. But from a talent standpoint, if we're just going top to bottom across the board like what I just did, the Buckeyes are a better squad than what Georgia has rolling into the upcoming season. Shout out to everybody in the comment section. Shout out to my guy, Robert Turner. He says Florida isn't the same team as last year as well. Miami isn't. Florida. Man, here's the thing, Robert Turner. You may not be the same team, but you still got the same head coach who had 13 men on the field, lost to Vanderbilt a few years ago. I mean, people got to stop making it seem like playing in the swamp is what it used to be in 2009, 2008. Like, Florida is the exact same program they've been for well over a decade. You haven't been to a national championship, won a conference title since Urban Meyer. So you kind of are. You kind of are. Just saying. I got a few more things I want to get into before we end this episode. So a lot of Florida fans have been asking me this question. JT, you believe Miami's going to beat Florida week 1, but what happens if Florida wins? And that's a very good question, so let's talk about it. So let's speculate the Gators find a way to pull off the win at home against Miami. They win 27-20 in a hard-fought competitive game, right? What a win means for Florida in this game is that the Billy Napier hot seat talk starts to cool off a little bit, because then you got McNeese State, and you end up starting the season off on a really high note. This win will be a great tone setter for Florida, because their over-under win total is 4.5 wins. And you got the toughest schedule in America this year. So a win against Miami gives you confidence that, okay, if we can beat Miami, we can definitely beat UCF, Kentucky, and we can beat the teams that we got a fair shot at beating, or we are expected to be favored to beat. And maybe you could pull off an upset or two if Miami still ends up being the team that most people believe they could be this year if everything goes right. Maybe Miami ends up losing this game because the swamp is just too much for them, right? And for Miami, from a Hurricane fan standpoint, a loss in this game would be a tragedy for Mario Cristobal's job security, because then the pressure on him starts to rise, because you are expected to win this game. Although you're a small 2.5 point favorite to do so, you got Cam Ward, Damian Martinez. Those were arguably two of the best players at their position in this past transfer portal cycle. You got an experienced offensive line. You're deep at wide receiver. You hit the portal heavy to improve the interior of your defense. There's no excuse why Miami, being the more talented team than Florida, should lose this game. And this would be one of the few times where you will look at Miami losing this rivalry game and be truly disappointed. Because in years past, when Miami has played Florida, it wasn't really that big of a shock that Florida was winning those games, because Florida at that moment were the better program than the Canes. But right now, both of these two teams have been down for so long, and Miami has out-recruited and out-portaled Florida these last couple of years. So you expect to win this game if you're Miami. And this gets your season off to a really bad start, because your schedule is manageable, but your margin of error is fairly low if you still want to get into the college football playoffs. Because let's say you don't win the ACC this year and you end up being the at-large bid. This loss ends up hurting you if Florida ends up just imploding right after and they end up being as bad as expected. And if Florida wins this game, you would think that Florida is in for a year where they end up shocking us all and they over exceed expectations because Miami is a pretty good team. And I know that the national media is pretty high on Miami nearly every year. They think they're going to be back. But there's truly a great reason to be high on the Canes this year, that they're going to live up to expectations. They can end up winning 10 games and make a playoff berth. And what this win for Florida would also show me is that their defense has improved tremendously under Austin Armstrong. The Hurricanes are going to be a well-balanced team. They're going to smash you on the ground with Damian Martinez. They got more than great depth at that running back position as well behind him. And Cam Ward should be able to expose this secondary. But with the win in this game, it shows that the defense has improved with their consistency, not giving up a lot of big plays, being better at communicating. You don't see as many blown coverages as what you've seen last year. And the pass rush is also pretty good as well, despite losing your top pass rusher to Ole Miss. So if Florida beats Miami, it would be great for starting this season off, Billy Napier having all this pressure on him. It makes his seat a little bit more comfortable to sit on. He doesn't have to blow on it anymore. It's fairly hot, but it's not scorching hot. But the hot seat for Mario Cristobal starts to heat up. Now, I'm not going to say that after this game, people are going to start saying, you got to fire Mario Cristobal. But now, the margin of error becomes increasingly thin. You better win the rest of your games. You better beat Florida State too, because if you lose to Florida and FSU in the same season, that isn't going to sit right with anybody in that program or the fan base, because you out-recruit every other Florida program. You shouldn't be losing to both of them. So that would be a huge detriment, not just to Mario Cristobal, but to Miami's perception in recruiting. Because you want to be able to sell Miami as a team that is on the rise and you're trying to get back to the glory days. But with the loss to Florida and maybe Florida State, it's hard to sell recruits on what you're trying to sell in terms of the direction that Miami football is heading if you go 0-2 against two teams in the state of Florida, two of the top tier programs in the state of Florida. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before I get up on out of here, college football is officially back, people. Week 0 is upon us, and the biggest game that's going to be getting played this weekend is Georgia Tech taking on the Florida State Seminoles in Dublin, Ireland. Florida State is currently a 13-point favorite, but I'm not sure they're going to cover that number. I really believe Georgia Tech has a great chance to not only cover, but they also could pull off this upset. Florida State is going to have a great defense this year. Nobody should deny that. But offensively, there's much to be desired. Quarterback, you downgraded from Jordan Travis. He leads for the NFL. And you bring in DJ Uiagalelei. And Florida State fans know that they're kind of limited in terms of their ceiling with DJU at quarterback. If you want to be able to maintain the level of success that you had last season, you need him to play at a high level, which is something that we haven't seen him do since his first couple of games when he replaced Trevor Lawrence in 2020. Ever since then, he's been a massive disappointment. And the thing with DJU is that in big games against ranked teams, he struggles to throw the ball with accuracy. He completed under 60% of his passes in all of Oregon State's top 25 games last year. He also doesn't make good decisions with the football. And if Georgia Tech can make Florida State one-dimensional, you take away the run game, you love your chances of being able to force a couple of DJU turnovers, because that's the area that your defense excelled at last year. The Yellow Jackets were 11th in college football and forced turnovers. You got a pretty good secondary. Yeah, your defensive line is concerning, and your defense was awful at stopping everything last year. The run, you were 130th in the nation. You pretty much were dead last. You weren't that great against the pass, but you got in a new coaching staff. And if your new defensive staff under Brett Key ends up being a massive improvement, and not only can you force a few turnovers, but you can get a few key stops in this game, you're going to give your offense the opportunity to put points up on the board against this defense. Because, yeah, FSU's defense is going to be good, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to bail out their offense if they are posed with having to defend a short field. And this is an offense that, by the way, returns 83% of their production from last year. Haynes King had nearly 40 touchdowns combined last year. He had 37, 27 through the air, 10 on the ground. They also returned their leading rusher, their top 2 wide receivers, and 3 out of 5 starters on the offensive line. The question is, can he play mistake-free football? Now, last year was his first year being in Georgia Tech's system. But if he improves in year 2 and he cuts those turnover numbers down and he only has 1 interception in this game, Georgia Tech should be able to produce when they get turnovers and turn those turnovers and the points on the board. Florida State this year isn't going to be a team that is going to be as potent offensively as what they were last year due to what they lost. They got questions at receiver. Your offensive line is still going to be good when it comes to run blocking, but I don't see this being a team that's easily going to be able to get the 27, 30 points every game. I think that them reaching 27, 30 on a weekly basis is going to be tedious for them because you're not going to be as consistent at throwing the football this year with DJU. So the path to the upset for Georgia Tech is erase the run game. If you can completely erase Florida State's running backs from this game and you get them in the ball game where they got to throw 30 plus times with DJU, you're going to have a few interceptions that you can get, and you're going to have some short field opportunities to turn those mistakes and the points on the board. Your offense, with the experience that you have, they're not going to be no stranger into playing in a game of this magnitude. What also helps Georgia Tech is that they're not playing this game in Doak Campbell. You're playing this game in a neutral site setting. So the atmosphere, the crowd, you don't have to worry about them taking over this game. So I love Georgia Tech's chances to pull off this upset. And to be honest with you, I would not be surprised if it happened. And the last time I talked about this game a few weeks ago, I took Florida State minus 13. But the more I sit on this game, the more I'm starting to lean towards Georgia Tech plus 13. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I wouldn't be shocked if they end up pulling off this upset. I really wouldn't. I expect this game to be pretty competitive. Florida State should come out a little bit rusty, something that Georgia Tech can take advantage of. And Brent Key is going to have these guys motivated. His players love him. They respond well to him. He does a great job getting them amped up. And that's the large reason why they overachieved and won 7 games in his first season there. So expect this thing to be pretty close. Georgia Tech plus 13 is looking really nice right now. But I'm going to have more things to say on this game as we progress throughout this week and we inch closer to kickoff. This is it for this episode of JT Sports Live. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Shout out to my guy Ken Hatt. He says, I feel like this Ireland game might get weird. GT might have a chance. Shout out to my guy Kate Roan. Shout out to my guy Robert Turner. He says, good night, everyone. God bless you all. Same to you, my dude. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications if you haven't already so you don't miss when we upload new content. And subscribe to the podcast. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Pod is available. Give us a 5-star review. Greatly helps us out a lot. If you got a question that you would like answered in our mailbag episode, send them on Instagram at JTSports_, on X at JTSports__. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in. My guy, Kate Rohn, says the Ireland part I don't get, but that may help out Georgia Tech for sure. It's just, with this being a game played in a neutral field setting, it helps Georgia Tech's chances, because a lot of upsets occur in college football when you have home field advantage, right? Or a lot of wins occur when you have that home field advantage if you're a good team. And although FSU does have a significant talent advantage over Georgia Tech, with this being a neutral site setting, it kind of negates how difficult it would be for GT to win this game if they did have to play it in Florida State's home turf. But